Ocean. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to North America's most listened to late-night talk show, Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, our guest, Dr. Michael Shermer. We'll also discuss with him the science of good and evil. I want to give you my last official update on the very sad situation with Art Bell and the passing of his wife, Ramona. And there's a reason why it is going to be my last statement on this. I'll tell you that in just a second. Art is in seclusion with close family members by his side. Now, he has asked us that no further statements until he can make it himself when he returns back to the airways. We don't have that date yet. I'll let you know when that happens. But that is his wish, and that it shall be. Okay? Thank you very much for your cards and your very concerned emails. The cards are being passed on to Art as they come in. Sad story out of St. Louis, and for a lot of you who remember Jack Snow from his Los Angeles Rams days, Jack is dead. He died at the age of 62 years old at the Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. He died of a staph infection that he has had on and off since October. Jack Snow has been an announcer for the St. Louis Rams football team for some time and last retired in football as a wide receiver from the Los Angeles Rams. Wonderful human being. And there is more to this staph infection story that is happening around the country, by the way. And I will have a show on this in the not-too-distant future. As a matter of fact, I was told by a doctor just a week and a half ago that this is a very serious situation that is affecting people. It's very quiet. It's not been publicized. We're going to get to the bottom of it. A staph infection that people just seem to get. They can't get rid of it. And in some cases, they end up dying. Jack Snow, dead at the age of 62 years old. Now, normally I wouldn't give you a story about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It closed above 11,000 for the first time in 4.5 years as the market continues to rally. What's so significant about this? Well, it was just the numbers that are very strange. You know how I see 1111 all the time. So the Dow closes at 11,011. Now that's weird, isn't it? I hope that's a good sign. And the price you pay for gasoline jumped nearly 9 cents over the past week as crude oil prices hovered near the 3-month highs. The government's top energy forecasting agency made this report, and they trickle up, then they trickle down, but they always seem to trickle up higher, don't they? If you own a dog, if you are feeding the dog food from Diamond Pet Foods, here's a message for you from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. There are reports now that at least 76 dogs nationwide are believed to have died as a result of eating contaminated Diamond Pet Foods. Diamond officials say they are doing whatever they can to help affected pet owners, saying that it's going to take some time to take care of all these customers. The company has recalled 19 varieties of dog and cat food because tests showed high levels of a toxin, a natural occurring toxin chemical that comes from a fungus found on corn and other grains that causes severe liver damage in animals. The company recalled products manufactured at its Gaston, South Carolina plant from around September to November of 2005. Based on sample testing, Diamond has narrowed down the exposure to food produced on October 11. But if you're concerned and if you have food made under the Diamond Pet Foods banner, we'll take it back to the store that you bought it from. 76 dog deaths around the country blamed so far. As you know, I continue to talk about the fact that I do not believe the bird flu is going to be a pandemic on this planet. I brought you guests who believe that as well. I want to give you an updated story on this entire situation. They say the bird flu cases are rising in the country of Turkey, but they do say new research offering a bit of hope. It's unlikely that these people will become seriously ill overall, and some of them are recovering quickly now. And they say, although not definitive, the new study suggests that the virus, though widespread in Turkey, probably doesn't kill half its victims, which was a fear based solely on flu cases that have been officially confirmed. So that's information I thought you needed to have. Vice President Dick Cheney arrived at work at the White House after resting at his residence following an overnight visit to George Washington Hospital for shortness of breath. There was a scare with him overnight. Cheney has a long history of heart problems and has a pacemaker, but it appears that his complications are related to an anti-inflammatory medication that he was taking for a foot problem. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon began breathing on his own and moved his hand and leg in response to stimulation as doctors brought him out of a medically induced coma. According to outside medical experts, the independent breathing was a good sign, but it gave no indication about other physical or mental capabilities in wake of his massive stroke. Damage to the brain can occur if it is deprived of oxygen for periods of time. They're not sure if that has happened to him. In Europe, leaders say they are very concerned at Iran's plans to resume sensitive nuclear research in coming hours. Iranian officials say they will remove seals at its nuclear facilities, ending a 2-year suspension of research. The German foreign minister described the developments as very, very ominous. And the Austrian chancellor held open the possibility of sanctions. I will predict here on this program, as I have all along, that there will be some kind of military intervention if this continues. And some people have said it'll happen by March. I think it'll happen very soon. If you go up to the coasttocoastam.com website, just take a look at this picture under Hot Stories about a kitten that was born with one eye. Though it may appear to be kind of gruesome, quite frankly, I like that phrase, it's a cute picture. So take a look at Cy, short for Cyclops, and it's just a little kitty born with one eye to its owner in Oregon. And Cyclops is doing... well, not too well. The kitten died after living for just a short time, but it's a cute picture. Comets have long lit up the sky in the imaginations of scientists. Now these icy bodies from the beginnings of the solar system are finally ready for their close-up. 6 months after NASA scientists first peeked inside one comet way out there, they're bringing pieces of another to Earth for study under a microscope. This weekend, the Stardust spacecraft will jettison a 100-pound capsule holding comet dust. It will nosedive through the Earth's atmosphere, and if all goes well, make a soft landing in the Utah desert. The searing plunge is expected to generate a pinkish glow as bright as Venus that should be visible without a telescope across much of the West. We'll check in later on this week with Richard C. Hoagland about this incredible story. In New Delhi, the Indian capital saw its first winter frost in 70 years. Tell me things aren't changing. A cold wave sweeping in from the Himalayas, killing more people, by the way, in northern India. Now, they say the temperature was 32 degrees, but that's pretty cold for them. And things are topsy-turvy. And several communities in northeastern New York were slightly shaken by a minor earthquake. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake measured a 3.7 magnitude and was centered near the Franklin-Clinton County line, which meets the Canadian border. What the heck is going on? In a moment, Stan Deo, our guest, will talk with him all this hour about these strange things that are happening on this planet on Coast to Coast AM. Stan Deo has held above top secret security clearance and has worked undercover for the FBI. He was part of an exclusive black project headed by Dr. Edward Teller, specializing in the development of flying saucer technology. He has lectured on many world events, which include the coming global economic collapse, developing solar-related crises in the Earth's climate, the UFO deception and its real intent and suppression of badly needed technologies and high-voltage physics of cheaper energy. For the last several months, we've had Stan on talking about Earth changes. He's going to be a major guest, by the way, on the Predictions program that debuts this Thursday. I'll tell you about that later on. Stan, what the heck is going on? Earthquakes in New York, frost, heavy frost in India that they haven't seen in 70 years. You know, what's up is down and what's down is up. What's happening?
Well, I think the major villain in all this is the sun itself, because it is outputting more energy than it should at this point in its sunspot cycle. As you know, it's a 11-year, a little over 11-year, about 11.8-year cycle. Mm-hmm. And we've been watching this one. It's there have been flares, sudden sunspot groupings, large amounts of them suddenly appearing on the sun in the last year. And we've had the hottest days on record in a number of places on the planet. Droughts in Australia, droughts here in the United States, droughts in other places as well in Africa. And then in contrast to that, we're having extreme flooding and landslides and fault lubrication, which, earthquakes come from. These things indicate to me something I've been saying for a number of years now, in that we're going to have a global warming due to mainly to the sun increasing its energy output and increasing the weather extremes, like extreme thunderstorms, hurricanes with lightning walls, which we're now seeing, extreme droughts, extreme flooding, a planet of extremes. And we'll go through a period, and I don't know whether it be 10, 15, 20 years or our full 22-year cycle, but we're going to go through a period where the sun will do this and probably back off. And I base that back off on cyclic studies of the sun and also on biblical prophecy, which tells us that eventually we will go into a 1,000-year era of peace on the planet, which I would assume would include growing climates and good weather.
Much better than what we're having now, I hope.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, in southern Colorado here, we had fires break out in the last week, and looked like they weren't going to be able to control it. And then, of course, miraculously, we had snowfall down there, which just put it out.
And you're right, too, Stan, when you say a planet of extremes. I just left St. Louis to come back to Los Angeles, where I am now, where other than a very short spell where the weather was cold and normal for December, January, it's been very, very warm there. It was like in the 50s a couple days ago when I left. Very strange. Everything seems to be extreme, as you say, and it's going to get worse, isn't it?
I think so. Before it gets better, we're going to see crop failures. We're already seeing it now, and of course, food prices will go up, but food availability will go down, driving the prices up. Water is going to be one of the most important natural resources we have, potable, drinkable water. We are very concerned, like for Australia, for instance, that the drought down there is just killing the country's economy. I think it's probably the worst drought they've ever recorded. And of course, fires are breaking out in New South Wales and other places. I guess the western state of West Australia will go salty because of the way they've handled the land to start with. But a lot of the farms are just drying up. They're ponds that they feed their livestock from.
Stan, how unusual is it for New York to get an earthquake, 3.7, which they say is small, but you can feel that. You can feel a 3.7.
It's not common, but it's not that unusual at the moment. But what we're seeing and have been seeing for some time, over the data I get from the Navy and analyze, we're seeing some signals that indicate seismic stress off the New York coastline and north of there, just slightly. This is of interest because all along there are methane gas deposits that have, in times past, recent times past, formed big bubbles that just went bloop like that from the bottom of the ocean and left a big crater.
As a matter of fact, if a ship was up there on the ocean, got hit by one of those bubbles, could it not get sucked right down?
It would lose its buoyancy, and it could sink. It could also break it in half. In the Gulf War I, there were some of the mines that were put in the Persian Gulf that would make a bubble of air come up under amidships and lift the ship up in the middle and break it. So it would either break it or sink it.
Okay.
And I think possibly there have been a number of scientists say that down in the Bermuda Triangle that the disappearance of ships or ships that sank without any call for help was because of sudden releases of methane gas.
And I would believe, at least for the Bermuda Triangle area, in some cases that's probably accurate. Doesn't explain them all. No. Definitely doesn't explain the aircraft. No. But I do believe that it is a possibility for ships and other boats.
Well, what has concerned me about New York is that we're seeing these signals, these extreme heat rises and heat drops, cold drops along fault lines that are out to sea and leading into the New England states. and for a long time they've been fairly stable. When the New Madrid fault went in 45 or something.
In the Midwest.
1811 was it? 1811 and 12, yeah, in the Midwest.
That must be Holly you're yelling over to.
Well, hey, we work together.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
She's my encyclopedia. I'm getting to the age, George, where things kind of start to fall off the edges of my brain.
Yeah.
Too much coming in.
I understand.
But anyway, in the New Madrid fault earthquakes in 1811, 1812, there were a couple of 8s. They shook fault lines in the New England states near New York. So what we're seeing right now, as we speak this week, is a bunch of little small quakes up the New Madrid fault line, up just below the Great Lakes, at the head of the Mississippi. And now you've seen these 1 or 2 over in the New England states, Connecticut, New York, whatever. But what is worrying me is these thermal signatures we get before large quakes offshore. It may all stay offshore, but because of the Gulf Stream and air currents that flow over New York, it kind of clouds the accuracy of the reading I can get when I normally read my earthquakes. And what is also worrying me is for the last 2 weeks, I've missed nearly half of the major earthquakes because they're not showing signals. They're just suddenly hitting.
No, what do you mean you've missed? If you've missed them, then we're all in trouble. You mean they're not showing the kinds of signs that they normally should show?
That's right. That's right.
That's
I've never
strange.
seen it in 9 years worth of looking.
Weird.
It's just a blank screen. Either somebody's fiddling the data, or there's some other thing happening that's clouding the data we get.
How do you get the data? Through the U.S. Geological Survey?
No, I get it through the U.S. Navy. They
right.
publish a declassified version of the entire planet's sea surface temperatures, but they also publish the variation of sea surface temperature all over the Earth in the last 24 hours. That's called the anomaly map. And I figured out a way to take those and reprocess the data and come up with the rate of change, which if there's a sudden change on a fault line on both sides of it, one side cools, one side heats, then I know we're going to have an earthquake within 1 to 5 days. Usually within 1 to 3, but sometimes it takes slightly longer. As you and I have discussed before,
right.
It can lead up to bigger things. But it's almost like flying blind here. Normally I get 70% of them, but there have been deep quakes, there have been shallow quakes, no warning at all. I've gone back and looked over the data, and there's no way I would have seen it. So it's spooky. It's like driving down a highway at night and your headlights go out all of a sudden,
Yeah, that's not a good feeling.
Well, now there's something happening in California. Are you back in California now?
Yep, just came back. First show there today. Here we
okay, well, there's it's about the 100th. Yeah, it's the 100th anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. The biggest one in recorded history. It was in April. Okay, and so what are we now in January? So sometime between now and April, we might see that big quake. It's interesting that they've made note of this in the newspapers, the 100th anniversary, because in California there are periods of 50, 100, and 150 years between major quakes, and certainly this is on that 100-year period. But what is really of interest is in San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco, in the last week to 10 days, missing animal reports have gone up.
Here we go. See, Jim Birkeland looks at that too, and he has always told us that when missing animals, as you've said, Stan, start to take off, when you see these things in newspapers, where's my dog, where's my cat, something's going on.
Well, Jim is probably the source that prompted this. I got an email from his people a couple of days ago, and they gave 4 days missing pet reports in the area they were looking at. It was in Bakersfield. And January the 2nd, they had 29 missing pets recorded. Then on the 3rd of January, 21 missing pets. On the 4th, 52. On the 5th, 77. Now, this is a lot. It's not due to firecrackers and fireworks on the 1st of
You are absolutely right. And what we don't know, what's the timetable from the disappearance to when something could happen?
It's fairly close, and as thin a signal as I could get today, I did find one under San Francisco, and that's kind of why we're talking about this. I don't know why the data, as I say, is so hard to read at the moment, but are so hard. But what I have here is an area that is on two
let's talk about that when we come right back, Stan. Plus, I want to open up the phone lines. A lot of people are interested in chatting with you. Can we do that? You stay with us?
Sure.
All right, stay with us. Stan Deyo, our guest, his website is standeyo.com. I'm George Norrie. We'll be back in a moment. We'll open up the phone lines for you right now as well. We'll be right back on Coast to Coast AM. Our guest tonight, Stan Deyo. We're talking about earth changes. We're going to take your calls in just a moment. Stan and Holly, by the way, will return to Coast for a full show on earth changes and preparedness. So make sure you circle that on your calendar. That'll be on January 16th. On January 12th, by the way, Stan will be one of the many guests on our Predictions television program that you can see in demand television. If you have cable, it is not available, I'm told, on satellite, but the producers will make a DVD available shortly after the series, and I think they're going to charge the same price as it would have been had you watched the television show. So those of you who get satellite television, you'll be covered on this situation. It will run throughout the month of January in the United States on In Demand, beginning Thursday night. In Canada, it will run in February, so you'll be able to see it in Canada during that entire month. And there's been such a run, by the way, on the After Dark newsletter, the Predictions January issue, that they have just printed up 2,000 more copies for you. If you'd like to subscribe and still get the Art Bell, Father Malachi Martin free CD on Perfect Possession. So you can call 1-888-727-5505, or you can go online at coasttocoastam.com for the subscription to After Dark, and of course the January prediction issue, which has been going like hotcakes. And welcome back to Coast. Stan Deyo, our guest here. We'll take your calls in a second. Stan, you were talking about San Francisco before the break.
Yes. The San Andreas fault line, as you know, runs down from Point Delgado up near Cape Mendocino straight through San Francisco and down to Palmdale area beyond Los Angeles. That fault line has ruptured in a major way twice in recent time, in 1906 for the San Francisco earthquake, and then in 1857 for the Parkville quake. Now, in between there's a segment of it that is not, suffered a rupture between San Francisco and Parkville. This, with the period that this thing has, and with even the small signal I'm seeing today underneath San Francisco, it looks like the USGS probability map is fairly accurate. They're saying that between 2006 and 2032, that's only 26 years, there's a 62% probability that a Richter 6.7 or greater is going to hit there in San Francisco area, either the Rogers Creek fault or the Hayward fault, possibly the San Andreas fault, because that one's overdue as well. But what I'm seeing today is on their least probable of the faults that they outlined in that period of time, with about 4 to 10% probability in that period of time. It's on the Concord Green Valley fault, which comes down from the ridges and faults that go up into Cascadia, up into Washington near Mount St. Helens.
Right.
And that's going to cut across several of them right across. And the reason that worries me is because that could cause, what we've talked about before, the extreme flooding in the San Joaquin Valley.
And you see this as a higher probability than what the USGS says?
At the moment, yes. That's what I'm seeing in the thermal signatures I'm looking at in today's forecast map. That's 1 to 5 days. And as I say, I'm saying that with caution because it's a very weak signal going under the continent there. And I can't see, once it goes under land, I can't see. I can only see the water temperatures over the fall.
It's a catch-22, Stan. We're all glad when you're right because we'd like you to be accurate, but we all hate it when you're right.
Yeah.
It's almost like those no win-win things.
Well, look, it's not, at the end of the world, as far as I'm concerned. People can prepare, and unless the thing drops them off the edge of a building or a bridge or something when it hits, they have a chance of survival. And that's what, Holly has spent a lot of time developing. her books and the DVD or CD-ROM, to tell people how to prepare and where best not to live.
Well, you'll be back next Monday, I believe, for a full show.
We will. We're going to go over all that.
Okay, good.
But it's getting to be a very tense time for folks, especially where you are.
To the phones we go. We'll pick it up by going to our wild card line. First of all, you're on Coast to Coast with us. Hello.
Hi, George, Stan. This is Jorma from Ohio.
Jorma, welcome to the show.
My question, Stan, last year when the Burma plate ruptured, they said it changed our length of a day by a couple of milliseconds.
Yes.
And I was wondering how much continental thrust, how much thrust would we have to get to change the length of our day significantly? And is it true that most of the continental drift is from like an eastward to westward direction? And I'll listen offline.
All right.
Thank you very much.
The last question first. As far as the continental drift, there's a growing weight of argument that says it's not continental drift, but continental eruption from convection currents under the mantle of the Earth, and that any drift, east or west, is simply luck of the draw as far as these plumes of magma coming up in the mid-Atlantic and elsewhere where the crust is being refurbished, if you wish. As far as changing the length of the day, significant, I assume, meaning in hours, I don't see that being a sudden event due to earthquakes. It's just it would require way too much energy to be expended and then released somehow. I don't see that as a
if we change time that badly, we're in serious trouble.
Well,
that's a big one.
George, there's been talk about the polar reversal, magnetic polar reversal.
Yeah, and I think that's starting.
I think it is. Did you see that spike that occurred 2nd or 3rd of January around the planet?
Yeah.
Okay. In investigating that and looking at it with some other data, it does seem that what we're looking at is a wobble of a top starting to flip. How a top slows down, then suddenly does a jerk, and then it comes back, and then it'll jerk again until it flips over. This is what I think we're starting to see with the magnetic field. Now, that could cause a lot of earthquakes to trigger should that kind of a thing happen.
First up, first-time caller line. You're on the air with us. Hi there.
Yes, George.
Yes, sir.
My name's Kevin. I'm from Batesville, Mississippi.
Oh, Kevin, it's all yours. Take it away.
I'm first-time caller, but I wanted to ask Stan, do you feel like what's going on in California is, what do you feel like, does this have to do with anything to do with the end times, possibly?
Kevin, I think it does. Certainly I'd like to address that in more detail when Holly and I get on the show on Monday, but I think that we're seeing a judgment of the United States begin, which will begin at the beginning of the tribulation period the Bible speaks of. I'm part of a growing number of people who think that America may be one of the Babylons, the mystery Babylon spoken of in the Revelation, that really gets crunched real hard at the end times.
Okay, one more question, and I'm going to get off.
Okay.
And Stan, you were talking about areas, or I guess around the country, which would be safe as far as the end times. Do you believe that would be down here where I'm at in Mississippi? Would that be safe, or no?
Well, what we were saying was clever places not to live, not what is safe. I don't think you're going to find absolutely safe places anywhere in the United States without the help of the good Lord protecting you. I will tell you this, though, where we were led by Dream Vision, as were many, many other people in various types of churches. We had a Mennonite church, a pastor and his wife just rang us the other day for directions here, who were led by the Lord to pull up their congregation and move down here to Colorado. That's where they were called. We've had people called over into Tennessee and places. So if you're a believer, I would say put it in the hands of the good Lord and listen real close.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate your call. Next up, west of the Rockies. You're on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hi, good evening, George, and good evening, Stan. I appreciate your work, Mr. Dale. And you mentioned a couple times the San Joaquin Valley and Kern County, in which I happen to reside here in Bakersfield.
Ooh.
And I was wondering how imminent you considered the possible seismic activity, and also how imminent you consider the flooding to be.
And I hate it, Stan, when you say "ooh" when someone tells you where they live.
Yeah, well, that's not a good place to live. It really isn't. Since the 2nd of August, when I put out for the first time that red alert, because I saw the entire Mendocino fault line out to the Pacific light up, with earthquake stresses. Since that time until now, I've been holding my breath. I race to get the Encoda maps every day from the Navy to see if it's going to start. And I see 2006 is going to be a busy year for that kind of stuff. And what you've got to watch in the San Joaquin Valley, right in the middle of it, east of San Francisco, is that all those levees, there's maybe 1,000 miles of them, and they're over 100 years old and haven't been repaired. And there's only about a 16-foot wall of rubble and rock and stuff keeping the ocean pressure out. So if you get a shake right down through that Concordia Green Valley fault, which I'm seeing a line under today, it'll break it, and it'll flood that central portion for sure, because that's under sea level. As far as any other effects, depending upon how the crust moves after that earthquake or earthquakes that occur, the southern portion of the San Joaquin could flood. But, I could be wrong. I mean, it could be out by 2 or 3 years. Certainly, I think it's a time for people to start looking at the levee situation there and actually getting money into it to block off the levees or rebuild them as rapidly as possible in the areas close to the west side of the levee.
Is that part of the preparedness program?
Well,
in terms of recommendations?
The recommendation to the California government, yes, to protect the San Joaquin. There are positive actions people who live in those areas can take if they just make enough noise. It's the wheel that squeaks the loudest. But because of the importance of the valley, I would think that it would behoove the government to try to either borrow federal funds or whatever to start redoing the levees. Take a lesson from New Orleans. Anyway, it's I don't want to totally depress people. I mean, it's a thing that people know about. They've been expecting the big one. And the trick is to prepare yourself. And if you can't get the levees fixed in time, I've talked to people in other areas of California who've got boats actually sit in their backyard that they normally take out someplace. They fix the boats up with emergency supplies in case.
In case they got to get in it.
Exactly. Emergency radio and stuff like that. And I had to applaud that. I thought, well, of course. Why not?
Even if you never use it, Stan.
Yeah.
It's worth knowing you have it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it doesn't take a very big boat to float out there and paddle over to a safe zone and get out and get rescued and start over again.
Good point. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Stan Deo. Hi there.
Hello, Stan and George. My name is Patrick, 19 from Michigan. I got 2 questions for Stan tonight.
Sure, Patrick.
All right. One's about a population thing. Okay, at the rate of the U.S. population growing, when will this affect us or the world, and how would this affect us?
Well,
mankind.
Patrick, that's a pretty broad question, but I assume, well, the United States is kind of getting full right now with what it can support, and certainly our economy is not brilliant. A lot of jobs are being outsourced overseas. And with the weather, the climate changes that we're seeing, our food production is not going to be brilliant for some time. I see the effect of the increased population density and the demand on resources, fresh water and food here being such that the balance of economic power and manufacturing will go to China and to Europe, to the European Union, such as it is. So that's my long-term prognosis of it.
And I got another one about, you guys were talking about how the animals knew, and it's instinct. I was just wondering, why don't we have this instinct?
I think probably because we've kind of let it atrophy.
So we did have it once, you think, Stan, huh?
I think so. I mean, in fact, I think you could probably get it again if you lived off the land for a while and were quiet and didn't have maybe a lot of radio and telephone noise around, electromagnetic signals.
Because during the tsunami, weren't there some island natives who were long gone before that tsunami hit? They felt something?
Well, there was. Now, that particular time, I think the one you're speaking about, there was an elderly member of the tribe there on the beach. He was a fisherman, and he'd seen it before when the tide went out like that. And he said, look, the big water is coming. Everybody listen to me, get out of here. And he moved him up because of that. because he saw visually a sign. However, the elephants and other things that went inland several days ahead of time, I mean, they raced inland. They knew without looking at anything. It was a sense, probably a magnetic field change. They said, "Right, we're out of here." And I listen to our animals here, and I'm sure a lot of other folks do too, because they are our eyes and ears when nothing else will do.
Next Monday, make sure you teach us how to read the signs of animals, if you can do that for us.
All right.
Put that down as a note. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Stan Deyo on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hi, George. Fred from Flushing, Michigan. And I'd like to ask Stan, actually 3 quick questions, Stan. On a recent broadcast back tonight on the History Channel, there was a map showing end times, and here in the Great Lakes, Genesee Valley, shows us being flooded out when a pole reversal hits. Next question. Last night, Art Bell's rebroadcast with David Adair, someone asked about a Paul Hill with unconventional flying objects, and the fact that, as David Sarita pointed out, George, on one of your broadcasts a couple months ago, helium-3 represents an inexpensive, unlimited fuel source for virtually everything. So I'd like Stan to comment on those if he could.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the second question. What do you want me to comment on the helium? As a viable source, is that what you mean?
Yes, indeed.
Are you talking about fusion source?
George, did David indicate what helium-3 apparently was an internal combustion source?
This was David Adair.
David Sarita.
David Adair mentioned Paul Hill, a NASA scientist in the 50s who had apparently been involved in advanced research projects with things like electromagnetic fusion engines, etc. And his daughter compiled all of his data into this compendium called Unconventional Flying Objects sometime after Paul Hill's death.
I would suspect that was probably a fusion engine, because even Adair himself claims to have done a fusion rocket, and helium would be, a good choice for that.
But David Sarita said that he was commissioned, I think through Department of Energy, to investigate alternative fuel sources, and he and his colleagues determined that helium-3, I can't recall in what context, whether it was internal combustion. George, you remember the interview, but he did say that the Shell Oil Company told him to cease and desist when Sarita said, gee, we proved that it would be a
viable source.
Unlimited source, absolutely. And we all know that propane companies, their trucks are fueled with propane gas. They're driving around all the municipalities in propane-fueled trucks.
Yeah, and we've got enough gas capped off to last us 100 years at the rate we consume it, too.
Very much.
I should point out, by the way, that this Thursday we've got a debate between Jerry Corsi and Michael Rupert with regards to oil. Jerry Corsi believing that this planet makes it. It's very readily available. Michael Rupert says no, so that's going to be an interesting debate, Stan. And we're running out of time here.
Yes.
But any last words of wisdom for us?
Well, I didn't get to address the other problem the question he asked, or stated, I guess, about the end times map with the flooding up in the, I think, did he say up in Tennessee? Is that where he said?
Up that way.
Yeah. My thought is that with the crust movements we're seeing now, is that the new Madrid fault line could release such a magnitude of earthquake that we would see subsidences that would allow the Great Lakes to empty down into portions of that area. So, in fact, even maybe eventually directly into the Gulf of Mexico, down the Mississippi. So that's the answer to that fellow's question.
All right, Stan, we'll talk with you and Hawley in about a week, okay?
All right, sir. Have a good evening.
Full program, and I want to thank you again for the great job you did for us on the Predictions television show, which will be this Thursday. You can see some extensive work of Stan Deyo. So I'll be back. I'm looking forward to this tonight. The founder, publisher of Skeptic Magazine, our guest, Dr. Michael Shermer. We're also talking with him about the science of good and evil and a number of other topics. So we'll be right back with Michael Shermer on Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Michael Shermer is the founder, publisher of Skeptic Magazine, the director of the Skeptic Society, a monthly columnist for Scientific American, the host of the Skeptics Distinguished Science Lecture Series at the California Institute of Technology, the editor of a webpage called skeptic.com, and the co-host and producer of a Fox Family television series called Exploring the Unknown. Dr. Shermer received his BA in psychology from Pepperdine University, his MA in experimental psychology from California State University in Fullerton, and his PhD in history of science from Claremont Graduate University. He's on with us for the full show tonight on Coast to Coast. Michael, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Always good to get different sides and different views on, and I wanted to get you on today to talk about a lot of things. Also get your reaction to a psychic who was on our program last week, and just get your taste of it. But tell me a little bit about how you founded Skeptic Magazine. What was the process to do that?
Well, I had finished my doctorate in the history of science, and I was teaching at Occidental College in Los Angeles, and actually I'd been teaching for quite a while as an adjunct professor at various colleges, and I was just getting bored with teaching and wanted to add something to what I was doing, and so I started the lecture series at Caltech and the magazine, and it just kept growing and growing, and it was just a garage operation. We were literally just working out of the garage while I was teaching, and it just kept getting bigger, and in 1997, my first book came out, Why People Believe Weird Things, and that did well enough that it gave me confidence to be able to just quit my job, which was hard to do. I mean, the university position's a pretty cushy, secure kind of thing to do, and that's what people work for their whole lives. But I'd done it 19 years at that point, so I decided to go ahead and just see if I could edit and write full-time. And so that's what I do now. I have an office and a staff of people, and we do the magazine and the webpage and the lecture series and an annual conference, and I do a university lecture series myself and shows like this. So, our job is we're twofold, really. We're social activists. We're actively involved in various cultural debates like evolution and intelligent design, of a recent one, for example. But we also do research and investigate claims and study why people believe what they believe.
Now, the word skeptic itself, give me your definition.
It's a thoughtful inquirer is the original Greek meaning. It's really, though, science. Science is skepticism, and skepticism is science. It's not that we don't know anything or believe anything. We believe all sorts of things. It's that we have a fairly high standard of evidence that we require. If a claim is extraordinary, that the evidence be extraordinary, to coin a phrase, and that there has to be some way to get at an answer to the claim for us. So, like, for example, on the God question, if it comes down to a matter of faith for a person says, I believe in God because it works for me, and I can't prove it. That's really not our domain. In science, there has to be some way to test it for it to be part of science. So if somebody says, I believe in God because of the following arguments and the following pieces of evidence, then we can legitimately ask, well, okay, what is the evidence, and how do you know it's true, and what's the quality of the evidence, and that sort of thing. So as with all science, we have to have some way to test it, or at least theoretically test it. There has to be some way to get at an answer.
So just by the nature of being a skeptic, we're going to have some fun tonight, too, because I'm going to throw some past predictions that have been on the program and get your take on some of these things. The nature of a skeptic generally, though, is not necessarily someone who doesn't believe that unusual things can happen then. It's that you look at it with a more, I guess, varied eye, a little more scientific, a little more hesitant before you jump and believe. Would that be pretty accurate?
Yeah, it would. And to refine that slightly more is to say that we're looking for natural explanations. Before we say something is out of this world, let's first make sure that it's not in this world. And by that I mean, let's look for a sort of natural explanation, a human cause, before we look for a superhuman cause.
Yet you do believe in some supernatural events?
No. Actually.
Oh, Michael.
Well, okay, here's the problem. What do you mean by supernatural?
Let me say this. Do you believe in ghosts?
No.
You don't believe in ghosts?
No.
Do you believe that there could be beings that live in this universe beyond our planet? Intelligent beings?
Yes, I do.
Do you believe they visited us?
No, I don't.
Okay, so you don't believe that.
But it's not a matter of sort of ticking off the checklist. It's really a way of, it's more of a matter of asking how it is we know these different things.
Do you believe in ESP, extrasensory perception, that some people are more intuitive, let's say, than others?
No, I don't.
Oh, Michael!
I don't, because no one has ever passed any controlled experiments. The kinds of levels of evidence that would be required for any kind of medical or scientific claim, the ESP people have never passed those tests. And if you leave out the goofy television psychic type folks, for over a century now, scientists have studied very rigorously with controlled experiments ESP, and inevitably they never get statistically significant results, the kind of results you need, say like with the cold fusion debacle, where no one could replicate the original findings of Pons and Fleischmann. And if you can't replicate the findings of claimed significance, then it's probably pathological science or pseudoscience. It's not that unusual things don't happen. Unusual things happen all the time. The question is, why do they happen, and what's the explanation? And when there isn't a consistent replication of results like with cold fusion or ESP, it's best to just remain skeptical until those corroborative tests come in.
Do you believe in miracles?
It depends how you define a miracle. If you mean by a miracle, like 1,000,000 to 1 odds of something happening, sure, those kinds of things happen all the time. As I like to say, 1,000,000 to 1 odds happen 8 times a day in New York City. You know, there's 8 million people, and if you have enough stuff going on, the law of large numbers says inevitably unusual things will happen if there's enough stuff happening. If you mean by miracle a suspension of natural law in which a divine being reaches
Steps
down
in.
into our world, something like that,
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Oh, my. Okay, well, let's pick up with this. The Coast to Coast, as you know, is a international program. And we made national news last week when I had psychic Sylvia Brown on the program.
Yes, I recall this.
It was on the very, what I thought was a euphoric night that turned out to be a very sad night of the coal miner situation in West Virginia. Originally, the entire planet had the thought that the 12 of the 13 miners were alive, or under some miscommunications there, really 12 out of 13 had died. Be that as it may, Sylvia was on the program. She was giving us some of her predictions, her past and present. She's had some hits, and I'm sure you'll tell me define hits, but we'll get into that. But it was at the moment where everyone believed that the 12 miners were saved. I, as a newsman, felt a little strange about that. I had asked a reporter who was down there covering the story live if the victims had been brought out yet. And she said, well, I don't think so. I don't know. That bothers me, because I've covered enough of these stories before where when you hear voices of miners, which they didn't even hear, by the way, that doesn't mean they're brought out alive. Anything could happen. Be that as it may, I said to Sylvia, well, Sylvia, inasmuch as they're alive, and I'm going to ask you this after the fact, how would you have answered the question about, are these miners alive? Well, she first of all said, look, I hate, answering questions like that. I hate people who react to things that have already occurred in so many words. But I believe they would have been found. My impressions, Michael, were that she agreed that they were going to be found alive, though she never said that. And then immediately after that, we went to a commercial. We then found out in a bulletin that there was major miscommunication, that the miners were indeed dead, not alive. I came back, and she immediately said, yes, they're dead. I knew they'd be dead. And I then played the tapes throughout the night, letting listeners decide for themselves, what they were going to do. And I toyed with the idea of confronting her on it at the moment, but I wanted to hear the tapes again, because I didn't remember her saying they'd be found alive. I thought, and I was correct, she said they'd be found. Again, I assumed she meant they'd be found alive, but she never said that. What's your take on all that? I know you've read some of the things about that episode.
Yeah, well, my take is she's cagey enough not to have committed herself to one position or the other, and therefore you can't be wrong. And the wording was perfect. They were indeed found.
They were
she
found.
didn't say they'd be found dead or alive. So, I mean, I take...
Because in some mine explosions, in accidents, the victims are never found.
Right. Oh, well, that's true. Okay, so yeah.
See,
right,
and that's what I was thinking. Well, maybe she's thinking that.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, to be blunt, I don't think Sylvia Browne is psychic. I don't think anybody's psychic. She's probably the least effective of the psychics, television psychics. I think John Edward and James Van Praagh are better than she is, although none of them can actually talk to the dead. Or, actually, I should point out, anybody can talk to the dead. It's getting the dead to talk back. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
And so how is it that they appear to be able to get the dead to talk back? And the answer is, it's a very interesting psychological trick. It's a magic trick. It's called mentalism, in which you do a cold reading. That is, you literally read somebody cold by starting very broad and general, and you say things like, they will be found, something broad like that, and then you focus in more narrowly. I've done this a number of times on radio shows. Last time I did it was for Bill Nye the Science Guy on his his PBS television show, which I spent a day doing readings for him in a studio in Seattle, and I was pretty good at it. I mean, the people were stunned. I had them crying and the whole thing, and I did this with no practice at all. And in fact, to make it harder on myself, I did an astrological reading, tarot card readings, palm readings, and psychic readings. And I don't know anything about any of these modalities. I just made stuff up and basically did the same reading, whether I was looking at a chart, a palm, tarot cards. I just made stuff up and essentially did the same kind of reading. Anybody can do this. This is all in my my book Science Fiction, which I describe the kinds of things you should say. And I got all these tips from professional mentalists and magicians who do this. And turns out it's just as simple as can be, because people want it to be true. So you start off broad and general, and generally kind of positive, and then you get more specific. And there's a number of these things that turn out to be true for most people. Like if a woman has short hair, you say, I think I'm getting that used to wear your hair longer. Or do you have an earring that's missing its match, and you've been hanging on to it to hope to find the missing one? Or to a guy, I'm getting something about her, or he's telling me something if it's somebody passed over, that you have some tools in the garage that are broken, but you don't want to throw them away. You've been meaning to fix them.
And they may say, no, they're in the basement.
Yeah, well, then that's fine. You take credit for the hit, no matter what.
Right.
Or to a woman, you've got some. I've seen photographs in a shoebox you've been meaning to put into a photo album. Or I see a calendar on the wall in your house, but it's out of date. And you've been meaning
almost everybody does that.
That's right. It turns out there's dozens, 50, 60 of these things. I list them in my book that you can use, that people don't realize that these are true for most people. And when someone passes over, if it's a guy, if it's his dad who passed over a grandfather, you say, the watch. He's telling me something about the watch. I don't know what this means. And these guys are stunned to hear this because they have their dad's watch or the grandfather's watch. And this is true. When my father passed over, I have his watch. And if you don't know that all guys keep their dad's watch, you think that the psychic has scored gold, that he must somehow be connected to the other side, when in fact that's not the case at all.
So let's assume that some, if not most, are making it up. Maybe they believe they're psychic and they're not. We'll give them a little credit for that. Aren't there, though? There's got to be some shamans out there from ancient lands that have had some incredible abilities to foresee the future and things like that. I mean, don't you think some of them exist somewhere? Maybe we can't explain why, but that they've got some kind of ability?
Well, remember what Yogi Berra said about predictions. They're hard to make, especially about the future. And, we have to have a baseline from which we compare the person we're testing. And these things are very difficult, as you know. I mean, if somebody says, I see dark clouds over the White House in 2006, Really? What does that mean, dark clouds over the White
There's
House?
always a dark cloud over a White House.
Or, Paris Hilton will have relationship problems.
Yeah.
Oh, it's shocking.
Or get into a car accident.
Earthquakes in Southern California. No! And if nothing else, you make 300 or 400 predictions, and, the law of large numbers says you will get some right. Just inevitably, this will happen.
And then you blow those out of proportion? Maybe?
Of course.
The ones that are right?
You publish the correct ones on your webpage, and you just ignore the others. Of course, the skeptics keep track of all the misses. So in science, here's the point. You have to keep track of the hits and the misses and ask, are the number of hits you got statistically significant beyond chance from the total number of predictions that were made? And when these things are recorded correctly, no, the answer is no, that no one can predict the future in that sense. Of course, weather predictions, stock predictions, these are notoriously, beyond a few days.
Well, but you can use fact with those.
That's right. And they aren't very good with that, and psychics are even worse than that.
Now, in your particular case, because it's very tough for you to believe these things, was it because you were brought up in a pretty hard-nosed way, unlike maybe some people who might be a little more sensitive to the paranormal?
Actually, I would have liked these things to be true. My upbringing was not particularly religious or anti-religious or pro-science or anti-science. It had nothing to do with it at all. I got into science because I was thrilled by the exploration of mysteries and that kind of thing. I actually thought there was something to psychics. In the 1970s, late 70s, I was in a graduate program in experimental psychology, and Uri Geller was all the rage.
Yeah.
Thelma Moss at UCLA doing studies on near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And I remember having arguments with my advisor, who was a strict Skinnerian and a materialist. He didn't believe any of this. And we used to argue about this, and I used to make the kind of comments you were making, and that other people make, that there must be something to it. Don't you believe in anything, and so on and so forth. And then I remember seeing The Amazing Randy on The Tonight Show, in which he showed how he could do everything that Uri Geller was doing, and he made an interesting analogy with lab rats, and saying you can't let the rat run the experiment, which is what the psychics do. And I thought, because that's what I was doing, running rats in experimental labs. So I got to thinking, yeah, that's right. Gosh, if these tricks, if this guy can do these tricks, and you can't tell the difference between that and the actual so-called real thing, then maybe science is not so bulletproof here in testing these kinds of people. And of course, it was Randy's point, you should have a magician present. But on the larger sense, then it started me down the road of being skeptical. Although I still thought there was something to it for a number of years, but the more I read about it, the more discouraged I became that there was a lot of hucksters and hoaxers, and the research was pretty sloppy, and there was a lot of wishful thinking. And I remember when I was a bike racer in the 1980s, I remember trying a lot of sort of performance-enhancing, sort of natural herbs and colonics and chiropractic and acupuncture. And I tried hundreds of different things, and I was feeling as superstitious as the next guy. Athletes are notoriously superstitious. They'll try anything to improve performance. And I always felt like, sort of deep down, that I wasn't being skeptical enough. I wanted these things to be true. And just the more I got into it, the more skeptical I became. It just grew over time as I, kind of looked into these things.
All right, well, stay with us. Dr. Michael Shermer, our guest all night long, right here on Coast to Coast AM. He's a skeptic. Well, for Streamlink members, tomorrow we'll have our chat, 8 p.m. Pacific time, 11 p.m. Eastern time. We'll sit back and just chat about things and events. So we'll do that tomorrow. So make sure you're part of it right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast with our guest, Dr. Michael Shermer, right here on Coast to Coast. Michael, do you think that we should continue some serious, let's say, university work into the psychic realm? At Duke University, Dr. J.B. Ryan tried that a long time ago. He's since passed on. Was getting some kinds of results, but unfortunately he passed on and the program died with him. But do you think we need to do good scientific research into this area?
Depends on which area. I think at this point, with things like ESP, Sci-Power, and reading the backs of playing cards, Zener cards, whatever, it's been done, since the 1890s, pretty rigorously, and they just have failed to produce replicable results. I would rather see resources put into other mysteries, other things that have not really been tested very well, and in which I think
such as
I don't know, things like peak oil, environmental questions about global warming. If you want to study human psychology, I think there's a huge realm there for things like hypnosis, even though that's been studied a lot, but there needs to be more done there, I think. Altered states of consciousness. We don't have a good, we don't have a good scientific explanation for altered states of consciousness, primarily because we don't have a good scientific explanation of consciousness. So if you don't have a good theory of consciousness, how can you have a theory that explains altered states of whatever it is you're studying? So, and by that I mean the neural correlates of consciousness. I think the guy doing the best work in this field is at Caltech. His name is Christoph Koch, K-O-C-H, Christoph Koch, and his book is The Quest for Consciousness. It's the quest for consciousness. It's looking for the neural correlates of consciousness. And the problem to explain is how do a bunch of neurons, single individual cells who fire, they release these neurochemical transmitter substances into these little gaps called synapses, how does that somehow translate into pain or music or love or affection or anger and all the thoughts that we have? Nobody actually knows this. We have some ideas, some pretty good ideas, but there is no agreement among scientists about the proper explanation for that. And to me, that's way more exciting than whether people can read each other's thoughts, by looking at remote viewing or, with the little ping pong balls over your eyes and thinking certain thoughts. These guys have been doing this for over a century, and they just don't have anything. So let's move on to something else that we can tackle.
Has anybody wanted to debate you at all, or do you debate them?
I do quite a few debates, actually, probably half a dozen to a dozen a year. The two most popular debates we do on college campuses are the God debate and the intelligent design evolution debate. So I debate a guy named Doug Guyvett, who's a theologian at Biola, at Talbot School of Theology in Biola, which is the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And he's a really sharp philosopher. And so we've taken this on the road, and he does.
Would you debate some guests that have appeared on this program if we can all set it up?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
I do a lot of that.
We'll do that down the line.
I mean, in a way, debate is a good way to sort of get the cards on the table. I was glad the intelligent design movement just sort of hit all over the place in the media, because it forced them to show and admit that they did not have any scientific curriculum to teach students. They admitted that in court, under oath.
Right.
We have nothing to teach. It was like, okay, end of story.
Well, now let me ask you this: with the unusual, with the mysteries, with the paranormal, and I ask you this with all respect: what do you believe in?
Well, the normal.
What's normal
and
anymore?
There's plenty of mysteries.
I keep thinking of the old Frankenstein movie with Gene Wilder, and he sent Igor to go get a brain, and Igor comes back.
Normal,
yeah. Well, I'll be normal. So I don't know what normal is anymore, Michael.
One of the great films of all time.
Yep.
Well, okay, so when we're talking about normal, all I'm talking about is the fundamental assumption of science is that there are natural explanations for natural phenomenon. By definition, something that's not natural, supernatural, paranatural, or paranormal, how do you study that? How do you test it and measure it? Once you've identified something, let's say that it turned out there was a force, an extrasensory perceptual force. Let's say it had something to do with quantum mechanics, and that when neurons fire in my skull, somehow this tweaks the ether, the psychic ether, and it goes across space and into your skull, and you can sense what I'm thinking. Let's say that's true, and that we've identified the mechanism.
Sure.
It's this quantum effect or whatever. Well, that's no longer the paranormal. That's now just part of the normal realm of science, much like television waves or radio waves, or in other words, electromagnetic radiation, for example, simply was incorporated into the natural world as part of science. Same thing with the strong and weak nuclear effect, and all the stuff particle physicists study, quarks and things like that. For somebody a century ago or 2 centuries ago, this would have looked like the paranormal. But once it's established as part of science, it's no longer the paranormal, and that's the fate of the paranormal. It simply disappears once science gets involved.
See, I've always believed that science and the paranormal overlap, and in some cases, they may be one and the same.
And another way to say that is there is no such thing as the supernatural or the paranormal. There's just the natural, the normal, and all the stuff we can't explain yet, mysteries. So let's go and try to explain them with our natural explanations, and either we will or we won't.
See, I believe in angels, for example. To me, that's not paranormal. I think that's been part of the universe for a long time. I see that as part of science. I believe in miracles. I think some incredible things have happened to some incredible people. I believe that's...
You mean like the Boston Red Sox?
The curse? Yeah, we may go there. But I believe that there is a scientific basis to faith, for example.
Like what? How do you mean that?
Well, if one believes in a God, okay, as I do, I don't think you do, but I'll ask you that when we get into it. It could also be that there's a scientific explanation for it, which I don't have, but it may not be just supernatural or just spiritual. It may be something that is part of this universe that if we knew it, if we had that kind of intelligence, it would be a very explainable process and maybe a wonderful process. But I believe that there's an overlap here.
Right. Well, I wrote an essay, and I write a monthly column for Scientific American called Skeptic, and
right.
One of my columns was called Shermer's Last Law, because I don't believe in naming laws after yourself. And my Shermer's Last Law is that any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God.
You might be right.
And by that I mean that if we do encounter an ET, it's not going to be something really close to us technologically and so forth. They're going to be light years ahead of us, because the chances of encountering somebody are pretty slim. And if we do, the chances of them being, just like 10 years ahead of us or 100 years ahead of us are nil, because evolution happens way too slowly over long periods of time. So if we do encounter somebody, they'll probably be 100,000 years ahead of us, or a million
or
years
more,
ahead of us.
yeah.
Or more. And look what we're capable of doing just in the last century. Space flight to the moon, and telecommunications and cell phones and so on and so forth. To somebody 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, we would appear godlike and mysterious, paranormal, supernatural. These incredible forces we have. I mean, here we are throwing voices across the ether. I mean, it looks paranormal until you know the technology behind it. This, of course, is Arthur C. Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. It's the same principle. So how would you determine the difference between what you and I would call a god because of his incredible powers and just a really advanced, smart, technologically powerful extraterrestrial?
You wouldn't.
Right.
Other than eventually, wouldn't you have to ask yourself this, who made them? And then who made them? If you keep going back.
Yes, indeed. Those are great questions. And then if we decided we found one called God, why couldn't we ask who made God?
Well, I asked my mother that many, many years ago, and she couldn't give me the answer. And it was a question that I guarantee you will drive everybody crazy if they try to figure it out.
Well, my debate partner, Doug Guyvat, the theologian, says the answer is God is that which does not need to be caused.
Or it's simply faith.
And to which I say, well, why can't the universe be that which does not need to be caused? And, there we go. So you end up with an infinite regress, and you get nowhere with that. So there are some mysteries that can't be answered. I think that's one of them. If time is infinite, the universe is infinite, we can't know the beginning. There is no beginning. If it's infinite, there can't be a beginning. So it's kind of pointless. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. Nothing. You can't. It's the South Pole is north of the North. I mean, what do you? You can't even ask the question.
Well, how about some of these people, guests, we've had them, who have electronic voice phenomena. They come in with incredible sounds. Let's make an assumption they're not making them up, but that they actually go out and record this stuff, and it happens to get on their digital recordings.
Yeah, but most of the things I hear on those are, it's like reminds me of when we used to play Beatles albums backwards when I was a kid, and you'd hear all these weird noises, and you'd hear words, sort of, or phrases, or broken phrases, or.
Well, some of them were put in that way.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, how do we tell the difference between noise and signal and noise problem? And
I mean, some of them, Michael, you can hear. I mean, again, I guess let me ask you this: you think they're making them up?
I think people are hearing. Look, humans are pattern-seeking animals. We find patterns all over the place. Sometimes the patterns are real, sometimes they're not. Science is the best tool we have for determining whether a pattern is real or not. The problem with electronic voice phenomena, like any kind of subjective experience like that, where the signal is very fuzzy and blends in closely with the background noise, and it's hard to tell, the mind fills in the gap. It's really hard to say whether it's actually a word or did I hear that in my own mind.
Okay, but I've heard some. I mean, I've heard them where they're, let's say, in the basement of a house that had burned down 100 years ago and a little girl died. And all of a sudden you hear on this EVP, Mommy, save me. And it's very hard to make out. But there is a sound there, and it could sound like that.
There's an interesting research by a British psychologist named Diana Deutsch at UC San Diego who does audio illusions, sort of like, we're all familiar with visual illusions. You see them in the psych textbooks kind of thing. But she does audio illusions, and she came up and did a lecture for us at Caltech and had dual speakers set up with a really nice stereo system where she played these little tape loops. She had hundreds of them, of which just little snippets of words that you loop together very rapidly. And if you play them long enough, it's so interesting how all of a sudden words start coming out of these little tape loop noises. But everybody in the audience, when she did it for us, there was about 300 people present. We all heard different words and different phrases, and her research on this shows it's very interesting that subjects that are hungry, for example, will tend to hear words that are related to food. Guys tend to hear a lot of sex-related words. And, women hear more love-related words. And it's very interesting. It depends on what's on your mind, what you're worried about, what you're anxious about. When the signal is really fuzzy and noisy, your mind fills in the gaps there with whatever is on your mind. And it's kind of scary in a sense. It's one of the reasons it's scary in the sense that we don't really know reality like we think we do. And it's one of the reasons science requires that you have these double-blinded experiments, because the experimenter bias is a serious problem where experimenters, researchers themselves hear what they want to hear, see what they want to see. And that's why you need to control for that.
In the old days, they used to have boxers fight everybody in the round in this boxing match. He'd be there by himself, and he'd have all these challengers, and he'd knock them all out one at a time. But in some cases, he fought 5 or 6 people. What I might do with you in this debate is bring them all in every half hour, but keep you in the ring by yourself.
Fine. No problem.
And they come in, and it's your job to, like, I want to bring in Hoagland, maybe Stanton Friedman,
sure.
A whole bunch of other people.
Bring them on.
Bring them on and see what can happen to you. I wonder if you'd get exhausted and roughed up.
$1 million baby.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do that. We'll do that as a show. That'll be quite the program. Would you like to believe that some of these mysteries are unusual and paranormal? Deep down inside, isn't there a part of you that would love this to happen?
Yeah, there is. I'm particularly fascinated by the extraterrestrial question. I think it's one of the greatest questions ever asked. Are there extraterrestrials out there? And we think of it as something that's sort of a 20th century phenomenon. It's not. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. The speculation of life elsewhere in the cosmos, and this debate's been around for several thousand years. And humans have always filled in the celestial spheres with intelligent beings, whether they're angels, gods, God, or various kinds of theories about life on other planets, they're inevitably portrayed as more advanced than us, more moral than us, more intelligent than us, really godlike. And I think there's something in the human psyche that drives us to see that, envision that. I mean, let's face it, there's no data. The SETI people, the scientists search for extraterrestrial intelligence, they have no more data for their subject than the UFO people. And no one has any data. We don't have a shred of evidence that ET is out there. But, the arguments are damn good that, it'd be a pretty amazing thing if we were the only ones. It's a big place, a lot of planets, and so on. So I would be surprised if we were alone. I'm sure we're not alone.
See, I think we've been visited before. I mean, with not the kind of technology we understand. They somehow, if they're as advanced as you had mentioned, if they're out there, I think maybe they came through some kind of wormholes or portals or something, because they can't get here conventionally. There's no way.
Uh-huh.
I mean, even that, I'd admit that.
It's too big, yeah.
But I do believe something unusual has happened to this planet. Maybe we were genetically altered, maybe we were jump-started, but something very strange happened here a long time ago.
Well, if that's the case, say the genetic thing, boy, it would have to be all the way back at the beginning, because we are all,
sure, I agree,
us to plants and worms and everything genetically. You can see the sequence quite continuously there. But of course that just begs the question: if we're back to the infinite regress, where did those aliens evolve? Assuming evolution works the same way everywhere in the cosmos, then they would have had to evolve from somewhere.
Well, I think being a skeptic is healthy, because I think it's important to get different views on, and it's critical to this program, for example, with all the kinds of people we bring forward to let people sit back and make up their own minds, that we also bring in someone like you who comes at it from a different perspective. I think that's healthy, don't you?
Absolutely. That's our job. I'll tell you one thing I would not like to be true. I actually would not want ESP to be true. I think people's private thoughts really need to be private, because if we all knew what we were thinking about each other, oh man!
My aunt, who is dead, who got her medical degree from Oxford, and she decided to change her entire medical career and devoted it to the search for extrasensory perception, telekinesis. She was obsessed with that. Unfortunately, she died tragically, Michael, but she was one of the foremost authorities in this country to want to take a scientific approach to these things. Wrote a book called Breakthrough to Creativity, came up with some startling things, and maybe that's one of the reasons I take the perspective I take. And then her life cut short when a electronics appliance fell into her tub.
Oh, God.
Now, you talk about being skeptical. I sometimes think somebody pushed it in her tub. I mean, she was getting close to some marvelous things that, a lot of us would have loved to.
Well, questions like creativity and genius, we really don't understand these. These autistic savants, they're all good at two things: music and calendric calculation. There's something about that we don't fully understand that's going on in the brain there. The Rain Man, the original Rain Man.
Yeah.
Last issue of Scientific American has a terrific story on this guy. He's phenomenal, but they got the brain scans in there. His brain is huge, and it's not divided like normal brains are. It's more integrated. And there's something about this that we don't understand yet. I think the great mysteries are not, in the realm of the paranormal. Hell, I don't think we know the normal very well.
All right. Well, when we come back, we'll continue talking with you about skeptics. We're also going to talk about the science of good and evil. And then later on tonight, we'll open up the phone lines. We'll give you an opportunity to talk with the founder, publisher of Skeptic Magazine, Dr. Michael Shermer. I'm George Norrie. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. All right, our guest, Dr. Michael Shermer, a couple of his websites linked up at coasttocoastam.com, skeptic.com, and the other one, I'll spell it, SCIAM.com. Dr. Michael Shermer, is he skeptic? Is he a non-believer? Is it one of the same? We'll be back in a moment with more. We'll also chat with him about Atlantis, the Bermuda Triangle, and some other issues on Coast to Coast AM. So, Michael, are you a skeptic or non-believer? Is there a difference?
In what?
Anything.
Well, okay, so you need
overall.
We need to specifically discuss points.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I don't just not.
Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to North America's most listened to late night talk show, Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, our guest, Dr. Michael Shermer. We'll also discuss with him the science of good and evil. I want to give you my last official update on the very sad situation with Art Bell and the passing of his wife, Ramona. And there's a reason why it is going to be my last statement on this. I'll tell you that in just a second. Art is in seclusion with close family members by his side. Now, he has asked us that no further statements until he can make it himself when he returns back to the airways. We don't have that date yet. I'll let you know when that happens. But that is his wish, and that it shall be. Okay? Thank you very much for your cards and your very concerned emails. The cards are being passed on to Art as they come in. Sad story out of St. Louis, and for a lot of you who remember Jack Snow from his Los Angeles Rams days, Jack is dead. He died at the age of 62 years old at the Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. He died of a staph infection that he has had on and off since October. Jack Snow has been an announcer for the St. Louis Rams football team for some time and last retired in football as a wide receiver from the Los Angeles Rams. Wonderful human being. And there is more to this staph infection story that is happening around the country, by the way. And I will have a show on this in the not-too-distant future. As a matter of fact, I was told by a doctor just a week and a half ago that this is a very serious situation that is affecting people. It's very quiet. It's not been publicized. We're going to get to the bottom of it. A staph infection that people just seem to get. They can't get rid of it. And in some cases, they end up dying. Jack Snow, dead at the age of 62 years old. Now, normally I wouldn't give you a story about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It closed above 11,000 for the first time in 4.5 years as the market continues to rally. What's so significant about this? Studies suggest that the virus, though widespread in Turkey, probably doesn't kill half its victims, which was a fear based solely on flu cases that have been officially confirmed. So that's information I thought you needed to have. Vice President Dick Cheney arrived at work at the White House after resting at his residence following an overnight visit to George Washington Hospital for shortness of breath. There was a scare with him overnight. Cheney has a long history of heart problems and has a pacemaker, but it appears that his complications are related to an anti-inflammatory medication that he was taking for a foot problem. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon began breathing on his own and moved his hand and leg in response to stimulation as doctors brought him out of a medically induced coma. According to outside medical experts, the independent breathing was a good sign, but it gave no indication about other physical or mental capabilities in wake of his massive stroke. Damage to the brain can occur if it is deprived of oxygen for periods of time. They're not sure if that has happened to him. In Europe, leaders say they are very concerned at Iran's plans to resume sensitive nuclear research in coming hours. Iranian officials say they will remove seals at its nuclear facilities, ending a 2-year suspension of research. The German foreign minister described the developments as very, very ominous. And the Austrian chancellor held open the possibility of sanctions. I will predict here on this program, as I have all along, that there will be some kind of military intervention if this continues. And some people have said it'll happen by March. I think it'll happen very soon. If you go up to the coasttocoastam.com website, just take a look at this picture under Hot Stories about a kitten that was born with one eye. Though it may appear to be kind of gruesome, quite frankly, I like that phrase, it's a cute picture. So take a look at Cy, short for Cyclops, and it's just a little kitty born with one eye to its owner in Oregon. And Cyclops is doing, well, it was just the numbers that are very strange. You know how I see 1111 all the time. So the Dow closes at 11,011. Now that's weird, isn't it? I hope that's a good sign. And the price you pay for gasoline jumped nearly 9 cents over the past week as crude oil prices hovered near the 3-month highs. The government's top energy forecasting agency made this report, and they trickle up, then they trickle down, but they always seem to trickle up higher, don't they? If you own a dog, if you are feeding the dog food from Diamond Pet Foods, here's a message for you from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. There are reports now that at least 76 dogs nationwide are believed to have died as a result of eating contaminated Diamond Pet Foods. Diamond officials say they are doing whatever they can to help affected pet owners, saying that it's going to take some time to take care of all these customers. The company has recalled 19 varieties of dog and cat food because tests showed high levels of a toxin, a natural occurring toxin chemical that comes from a fungus found on corn and other grains that causes severe liver damage in animals. The company recalled products manufactured at its Gaston, South Carolina plant from around September to November of 2005. Based on sample testing, Diamond has narrowed down the exposure to food produced on October 11. But if you're concerned and if you have food made under the Diamond Pet Foods banner, we'll take it back to the store that you bought it from. 76 dog deaths around the country blamed so far. As you know, I continue to talk about the fact that I do not believe the bird flu is going to be a pandemic on this planet. I brought you guests who believe that as well. I want to give you an updated story on this entire situation. They say the bird flu cases are rising in the country of Turkey, but they do say new research offering a bit of hope. It's unlikely that these people will become seriously ill overall, and some of them are recovering quickly now. And they say, although not definitive, the new Stosser technology, he has lectured on many world events, which include the coming global economic collapse, developing solar-related crises in the Earth's climate, the UFO deception and its real intent and suppression of badly needed technologies and high-voltage physics of cheaper energy. For the last several months, we've had Stan on talking about Earth changes. He's going to be a major guest, by the way, on the Predictions program that debuts this Thursday. I'll tell you about that later on. Stan, what the heck is going on? Earthquakes in New York, frost, heavy frost in India that they haven't seen in 70 years. You know, what's up is down and what's down is up. What's happening?
Well, I think the major villain in all this is the sun itself, because it is outputting more energy than it should at this point in its sunspot cycle. As you know, it's a little over 11 year, about 11.8 year cycle. Mm-hmm. And we've been watching this one. It's there have been flares, sudden sunspot groupings, you know, large amounts of them suddenly appearing on the sun in the last year. And we've had hottest days on record in a number of places on the planet. Droughts in Australia, droughts here in the United States, droughts in other places as well in Africa. And then in contrast to that, we're having extreme flooding and landslides and fault lubrication, which, you know, earthquakes come from. These things indicate to me something I've been saying for a number of years now, in that we're going to have a global warming due to mainly to the sun increasing its energy output, and increasing the weather extremes, like extreme thunderstorms, hurricanes with lightning walls, which we're now seeing, extreme droughts, extreme flooding, a planet of extremes. And we'll go through a period, and I don't know whether it be 10, 15, 20 years or a full 22-year cycle, but we're going to go through a period where the sun will do this and probably back off. And I base that back off on cyclic studies of the sun, and also on biblical prophecy, which tells us that... Well,
not too well. The kitten died after living for just a short time, but it's a cute picture. Comets have long lit up the sky in the imaginations of scientists. Now these icy bodies from the beginnings of the solar system are finally ready for their close-up. 6 months after NASA scientists first peeked inside one comet way out there, they're bringing pieces of another to Earth for study under a microscope. This weekend, the Stardust spacecraft will jettison a 100-pound capsule holding comet dust. It will nosedive through the Earth's atmosphere, and if all goes well, make a soft landing in the Utah desert. The searing plunge is expected to generate a pinkish glow as bright as Venus that should be visible without a telescope across much of the West. We'll check in later on this week with Richard C. Hoagland about this incredible story. In New Delhi, the Indian capital saw its first winter frost in 70 years. Tell me things aren't changing. A cold wave sweeping in from the Himalayas, killing more people, by the way, in northern India. Now, they said the temperature was 32 degrees, but that's pretty cold for them. And things are topsy-turvy. And several communities in northeastern New York were slightly shaken by a minor earthquake. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake measured a 3.7 magnitude and was centered near the Franklin-Clinton County line, which meets the Canadian border. What the heck is going on? In a moment, Stan Deo, our guest, will talk with him all this hour about these strange things that are happening on this planet on Coast to Coast AM. Stan Deo has held above top secret security clearance and has worked undercover for the FBI. He was part of an exclusive black project headed by Dr. Edward Teller, specializing in the development of flying